The night shattered. A blast swallowed my porch lights and sent glass screaming through the dark. I saw the fire eat the siding through my own camera feed. On the grainy loop, a shadow lifted a handheld radio, spoke 2 words, and walked away. My throat closed. I knew, in that single frame, that they were not fixing a pipe. They were watching. They thought they were invisible. They were wrong. Stay with me until the end. What I found will put them behind bars. I lived in a quiet street with neat lawns and polite smiles. My house was ordinary from the outside. It had a small porch and a mailbox with peeling paint. I kept to myself. I liked my routines. I fixed the faucet on Tuesdays. I mowed on Saturdays. I watered the front roses every morning. I also liked to know what happened around me. So I installed cameras. I put them low, high, and under eaves. They were cheap. They were honest. They recorded everything. I checked them like a ritual. The footage comforted me. The footage made me feel safe. None of my neighbors asked questions. No one wanted to know I watched. I never thought the cameras would save anything bigger than a stolen package. I never thought the cameras would become a witness for war. On the night it happened, rain hammered at the windows like a fist. I woke to a hollow sound that was not thunder. My bed jolted. My heart thudded loud enough to drown the rain. I grabbed my phone by instinct. I opened the security app before I stood. The main feed was on fire. Flames licked the porch in pixels. I watched my house burn on my own screen. I stayed frozen and cursed like a man who had lost his balance. I ran to the door with socks sliding on tile. The heat hit me immediately when I stepped outside. Glass crunched under my feet like broken promises. My camera recorded me running and yelling. The feed stuttered, then zoomed on movement near the side fence. There was a dark shape by the trench they had dug. Someone crouched with a device I could not identify. They moved with purpose and no fear. They did not look like a neighbor repairing a line. They looked like someone who belonged to a plan. My lungs burned from smoke and from a new, colder fear. I replayed the footage 3 times. On the 3rd replay, I saw the radio. A mouth moved. A voice crackled. The shape whispered a command into that small radio. The feed froze on the mouth and the radio. I felt a claw of certainty. This was not an accident. I felt those neat lawns became a stage for cruelty. I wanted to knock on each door and scream the truth. I wanted violence and I wanted justice. Instead, I pulled the footage deeper into my device. I backed up every frame like burying diamonds. I left no trace of my copying on the main server. My hands shook as I labeled the files. I called my lawyer before I called my mother. I told him only the barest facts. He told me to stay put. He told me to preserve evidence. He told me to breathe. I stepped back into my house with soot under my nails. The trench outside loomed like an accusation. I thought of the HOA meetings, the polite nods, the petty cries for order. I thought of the man who signed minutes with a steady hand. I thought about how small cruelties grow into permission for larger crimes. I sat on my charred couch and watched the camera angle that showed the trench. I could see fresh dirt and the marks of shovels. I could see a flattened path where equipment had been dragged. I could see, in the edge of the frame, a glint that looked like a badger or rain. My stomach dropped. They were organized. They had thought of hiding in plain sight. They had thought a trench was a practical explanation. They had made it into a trench of surveillance. My mouth tasted of metal. I promised myself not to be naive. I promised myself I would not be quiet. I told my lawyer I had a recording of someone using a radio right before the blast. He did not say I told you so. He said we document everything. We go slow and hard. That night, I slept in my clothes and woke with the video burning behind my eyelids. I could not unsee the face on the footage. I replayed the radio moment until my phone died and rebooted. The trench outside was the first wound. The camera was the only witness I still had that did not lie or plead. I hugged that witness like a lifeline. The trench didn't look like construction anymore. It looked like a boundary. A border drawn around my house like chalk around a corpse. From my window, the dirt formed a ring that felt deliberate and closed, like a trap. No city crew. No warning signs. No paperwork taped to a door the way they always do during repairs. Just fresh soil, packed tight, and prints from boots I didn't recognize. This wasn't maintenance. It was perimeter control. And this is my story. I'm the homeowner they tried to cage like an animal. I kept scanning the trench through shaky breaths, waiting for someone to step out of the dark. Every gust of wind sounded like a voice. Every rustle in the grass sounded like a footstep. The quiet didn't feel peaceful anymore, it felt staged. Like the silence after a verdict. Like they already decided something about me, long before I knew a fight had started. Coming up, I'll show you the moment I realized they were mapping my movements, not my pipeline. The paranoia came in slow, sharp waves. Not loud, surgical. Not panic, calculation. If they dug this deep, they expected a purpose. They didn't want to reach something underground. They wanted to surround something above it. Me, I walked the perimeter at dawn, pretending to inspect damage. But really I was counting distances. Every 10 feet there was a depression, like a planted module or sensor. Someone wanted signal lines, not drainage, not irrigation, surveillance. This is still my voice. The man the HOA tried to erase behind a fake excuse for community improvement. The guy you're hearing is the one whose whole property became a crime scene long before the fire. And the worst part was not knowing how many eyes were already watching from behind curtains. The trench curved too smoothly for amateurs. It wasn't random digging, it was alignment. Grid perfect, architectural. Whoever planned it came prepared. Not curious, informed. Someone with blueprints, someone with access. I remember standing at the edge of that dirt line and feeling something I hadn't felt since childhood. The sense that a predator was inches away but not visible yet. Like a hunted animal noticing it was already cornered. Coming up next, I'll tell you what I found buried there. And once you hear it, you'll understand why I stopped calling this paranoia, and started calling it a siege. By morning, the trench stopped being a strange project and became a threat with a pulse. I walked outside pretending to check storm damage again, but what I was really doing was hunting for logic in a place that had none. The dirt looked too fresh, too smooth, like someone had been here long after the fire died out. One section near the back fence had been tamped harder than the rest, like someone covered something in a hurry. My shoes sank into it a little deeper, and I felt a hollow shift under the surface. Not rock, not pipe, weight, equipment. That was the first moment I knew I was standing on top of proof. And remember, the voice you're hearing right now belongs to the homeowner the HOA tried to intimidate into silence. The quiet neighbor they thought would never look beneath the surface. I knelt and brushed away the wet soil with my hands. The mud clung to my fingers like tar. A sliver of metal glinted back at me. Not random trash, manufactured, machined. I dug faster, heart pounding a beat that didn't match the rhythm of the morning. A small module surfaced, black, rectangular, sealed. Not a sprinkler part, not a junction box, something meant to record or transmit. I didn't lift it all the way, not before filming it first. The lawyer had drilled that rule into me. Document first, touch second. My phone trembled in my grip while I circled the trench and filmed every angle. The paranoia wasn't a mood anymore, it had turned into evidence. Coming up, I'll show you what was inside that module, and why I stopped feeling like a victim and started feeling like a hunted witness. I slipped the device into a Ziploc bag from the garage, sealed it like a biological sample, and tucked it into a fireproof lockbox. Something told me this wasn't the only one buried out here. This looked like a network. A perimeter grid, an invisible cage mapped around my home. Halfway through circling the trench again, I noticed something worse. The boot prints didn't lead outward. They circled my property, then stopped. Like the people who planted the devices didn't lead through a street. They disappeared back into a house, into a backyard, into the neighborhood itself. This is still my voice, the guy living inside a surveillance ring built by the same people who wave hello during daylight. I was surrounded long before the explosion. I just didn't know I was already prey. A shadow moved behind a frosted window in the house across from mine. No curtain shifted, no retreat, just stillness. Like someone who didn't have to hide because they believed I had no idea yet. My skin crawled. The trench was no longer about watching. It was about ownership. Control disguised as community. Compliance disguised as safety. And just when I got ready to step back inside, a faint click echoed from under the soil, a sound too deliberate to be nature. I froze. Whatever was under there, it wasn't inactive. Because the moment I leaned in to confirm it, I realized it wasn't the only device still turned on. Something down there was listening back. The clicking didn't stop. It came in short bursts, like a pulse, too rhythmic to be random, too clean to be natural. I leaned closer, and the ground itself sounded wired. That was when the fear changed shape. Not they recorded me, but they were still recording me now. Not the past, the present. Live. The trench wasn't a relic. It was a live feed perimeter. Someone on the other end knew I had found one of their nodes. And this voice you're hearing, don't forget. This is the homeowner they tried to trap in his own yard like an exhibit. The target, not the participant. A breeze carried the faintest interference, a soft crackle like radio bleed through, and my breath caught halfway up my throat. It felt like placing your hand on a fence and realizing it's electrified. The air had voltage, the silence had listeners. I backed away slow, not because of caution, but because sudden movement felt like giving them a reaction. Someone was watching for reactions. Not property damage, psychological effect. Coming up, you'll see the exact moment I realized this wasn't surveillance. It was profiling. I headed inside and locked the door, ridiculous, considering what I was up against, but instinct still makes you reach for human rituals even when war has already started. Inside, I paused before turning on a light. If they could see heat signatures, they could see my outline. If they could hear vibrations, every step was a confession. My reflection in the window didn't look like a homeowner anymore. It looked like a suspect in his own life. A notification blinked on my camera dashboard, motion alert, front fence line. Not 2 seconds after I left the trench. The timing was surgical. Cuz right pointing arrow effect. Someone was reacting to my reaction. This is still me speaking. The man living inside a monitored box disguised as a neighborhood. And the part you need to understand is that the terror wasn't cinematic. It was quiet, cold, slow strangulation, not violence. Another alert popped up, side yard. Then back gate. No faces, no bodies, just movement markers, like someone pacing, but never entering frame, hovering, tracking. Coming up next. The first time I caught them in the act, not by accident, but because I forced their hand. The house felt smaller now, like the walls had ears and the floors had nerves. Even breathing started to feel like incriminating evidence. That's when I knew this wasn't paranoia. Paranoia is fear without proof. What I had was proof without a witness. Then the dashboard flashed something new. A symbol I'd never seen from my own system before. An overlay I hadn't installed. They weren't just watching my yard. They were inside my camera network. And when I clicked the alert to see who was tapping into my feed, a familiar house number showed up, not mine. The foreign device accessing my cameras didn't belong to a hacker across the country. It belonged to a property 2 doors down. The system identified the IP as local HOA service node. They didn't even bother hiding it behind a VPN. Why would they? People who believe they own you never bother covering their tracks. They assume permission. My throat locked up when I saw the property tag. Not a stranger. A neighbor. Not someone out there. Someone inside the fence line of my life. And this voice you're hearing right now, don't lose track, it's the homeowner they thought they could domesticate with intimidation. The one they monitored like livestock. The access log showed timestamps going back weeks. Before the trench. Before the fire. Before the first argument I ever had with them about property lines. This wasn't retaliation. It was preparation. Coming up, you'll learn the moment I realized this wasn't about me personally. It was about control, and I was just the first test subject. A sick detail hit me. They didn't panic when I found the device. They escalated. That meant they believed the law couldn't touch them. Not HOA as a board. HOA as a shield. The click outside started repeating. Shorter bursts. Communication pings. A live system responding to movement. And then came the worst part. A faint chirp inside the house. Not from my cameras. From inside the walls. I remember standing in my kitchen and realizing my home wasn't breached once, it was infiltrated long ago. Every board creak sounded loaded. Every hum carried intent. I wasn't living in a house anymore. I was living inside someone else's surveillance bubble. This is still me. The homeowner they marked like property inventory. The man giving you this story because proof is meaningless if no one hears it. I checked the log again. Same IP, same property, same timestamp. 5 seconds after I touched the trench. Someone was watching in real time and updating the system remotely. Coming up next. The moment I confirmed there were multiple nodes under my property. And the pattern behind them pointed to something much bigger than a neighborhood dispute. I stared out the window toward the house that matched the service tag. Blinds closed. Lights off. Not avoidance, confidence. Predators don't hide from prey. The paranoia became structure now. Not nerves, narrative. And right when I stepped closer to the window for a better look, my phone vibrated again. A second house had just logged in. One connection could be a rogue neighbor. Two connections meant a network, and networks always have an architect. Two connections meant planning. Two meant roles. Two meant someone was issuing orders while others executed them. When the second IP lit up on the log, the fear stopped feeling abstract, it became architecture. The label on the second connection wasn't service. It was management node. Different access level. Different credentials. Someone wasn't viewing, someone was administrating. And don't forget who's telling you this. This is the homeowner they tried to neutralize like a liability instead of a neighbor. The person they thought would never trace the crime back to the nest. I pulled the metadata. Same HOA subnet. Two different properties. One pattern. Both houses belonged to board members. Not maintenance crews. Not contractors. Board. Coming up, I'll tell you which setting I clicked that showed me exactly how long they'd been inside my life. The timestamp stretched back months. The earliest log was from before I even noticed the trench. Before the pushy letters. Before the inspection notices. Before the first polite threat disguised as concern. They didn't dig first. They watched first. The trench wasn't the surveillance. The trench was the confidence. The moment they believed I was broken in enough to never question them again. The realization hit like static behind the ribs. I was not dealing with nosy neighbors. I was dealing with a coordinated board acting like an intelligence unit. This is still me speaking, the man living inside their case file. The person they studied, not governed. I zoomed in on the admin connection. Permissions. Full. Camera control. Writable. Microphone taps. Enabled. Export footage. Unrestricted. They didn't just spy on me. They curated what I saw. A normal HOA doesn't get this kind of access. A board doesn't plug into cameras by accident. You don't get into a private network without backend keys. Which means someone above homeowner level provided them. Coming up next, I'll show you the moment I found proof that what they were doing wasn't snooping, it was data harvesting. But right then, standing in my smoky living room, a new question dug in like teeth. If this wasn't about me as a person, if I wasn't the final target, then what was I? A test subject? A gateway? A rehearsal? I felt watched not by eyes, but by procedure. And right when I scrolled to the deepest permission logs to see who authorized the access, a third house lit up on the network. And this time, it wasn't a board member, it was the HOA president's property. When the third connection appeared, the interface didn't list it as just another board node. It flagged it with a higher priority tag. Different class, different clearance. This wasn't participation, this was command. And remember who is speaking to you right now. The homeowner they treated like a lab animal inside his own property. The one who wasn't supposed to ever see the control panel they were running him from. The host name resolved a second later. HOA Pres office. Not their street, not their network, their office. Which means this wasn't a couple of rogue neighbors. This wasn't a committee gone nosy. This was institutional. Coming up, I'll show you what setting I found that proved I wasn't the only resident in their system. My hands didn't shake. The silence shook. Because in one instant, the question's inverted. Not why me? But who else? The president's machine wasn't watching, it was overseeing. They weren't lurking for gossip, they were managing a feed. There are only two types of surveillance: punitive surveillance and developmental surveillance. One crushes a threat, one prepares a target. And since I'm still the one telling you this, the one they thought would break before thinking, you already know which category they put me in. The list of permissions under the president's node wasn't smaller. It was longer. Internal logs, notes, timestamps of activity reactions. Meaning, someone wasn't just spying, someone was profiling. Coming up, you'll hear the part where I discover what label they had assigned to me inside their internal system, because it wasn't homeowner. When the realization formed, it didn't feel like fear. It felt like being named without being met. Categorized like a file. Handled like a liability. The house wasn't my home anymore. It was a terminal I was living inside. Surveillance breaks privacy. Profiling breaks autonomy. And that was their next move: strip identity, then override ownership. The screen dimmed for a second like the network pulsed. 3 connections now fully active, like a triangle closing in. Not peering, encircling. And here's your reminder. This is still the voice of the man whose property they turned into an operating perimeter. The man they thought wouldn't survive understanding the scope. A normal HOA doesn't need classification tiers. A normal HOA doesn't maintain resident psychological tracking. A normal HOA doesn't divide people into cooperative and non-integrated. Unless the house wasn't the real asset. The homeowner was. And right when I scrolled to the internal notes attached to my profile, the system wouldn't let me close the tab. Not crash. Not glitch. A forced hold. And what I read in the resident classification field is the exact moment I realized they never intended to control me. They intended to break me. Coming up next, the label they used for me, and the first proof this wasn't surveillance at all. The system didn't freeze by accident, it wanted me to read that line. The resident classification field wasn't a drop-down. It was a verdict. And remember who's speaking to you right now. The homeowner they tried to mentally corner like an animal inside his own perimeter. The label was short. 4 words. Clean, clinical, cruel, unstable, watch closely. Not unsafe, not problematic, not non-compliant, just unstable. Like a chemical, like something that might spill. Like something you monitor until it explodes. Coming up, I'll show you how I found out they were actively testing me, not just watching. My lungs didn't move for a second. Not from panic, from recognition. Profilers don't record behavior, they provoke it. They engineer outcomes. This wasn't surveillance for protection. This was containment for prediction. And because I'm still the one narrating this, you're hearing this from the exact person they mislabeled as unstable. A man who was never supposed to outthink the system built to cage him. The timestamp beside the label wasn't from the day I discovered the trench. It was weeks earlier, meaning the trench wasn't the beginning. It was a stage. I scrolled further. Another internal note. Not a sentence. An instruction. Observe stress responses under boundary pressure. Boundary. That word didn't mean fence. It meant identity wall. Push until the subject cracks. Coming up, I reveal the second instruction. The one that proves this was coordinated, not local. The logs didn't record noise complaints or landscaping disputes. They recorded pattern deviation. They weren't tracking disturbances. They were cataloging resistance. Imagine living in your home while another entity waits for you to psychologically fold, not by force, but by slow engineering. And here's your reminder. This voice right now belongs to the man they were waiting to see collapse. Pressure isn't physical when the goal is surrender. Pressure is context. Pressure is separation. When a person stops feeling like their home is theirs, the mind stops orienting. And once orientation breaks, compliance is voluntary. That's the real play, not obedience. Self-submission. I scrolled again. The second instruction loaded. Escalate containment if subject resists conditioning. Not if he breaks rules. If he resists conditioning. They weren't trying to stop misconduct. They were trying to create compliance by identity erosion. And that's when I realized the trench wasn't dug to block escape. It was dug to define a perimeter of control, a psychological collar. The wall wasn't spying. The wall was programming. The next file I opened wasn't about me. It was about what they planned to do after I failed to conform. And it named the escalation target. Coming up next, the step where they stop observing and start disciplining. The escalation file didn't log penalties. It logged procedures. They weren't planning to fine me. They were planning to restructure me. And remember who is speaking to you. The homeowner they classified as a psychological experiment inside his own 4 walls. A normal HOA would list property violations. This listed behavioral deviation thresholds. It didn't say what I did. It tracked what I failed to become. Coming up, you'll hear the moment I realized they weren't waiting for a trigger, they were building one. Another line, containment protocol. Stress induction cycles permissible. Stress induction, not discipline. Engineering breakdown. There is a level of intrusion where the mind stops calling it surveillance and starts calling it captivity. That line was gone now. The file indexed environmental manipulation as step 1. They wanted to destabilize the inside of the house before ever touching the outside. That meant isolation, pressure, uncertainty. And since I'm still the one narrating this to you, the target of that blueprint is right here, still not broken. The next stage chilled harder than the trench. Apply external perimeter disruptions, objective, psychological compression. They weren't digging for drainage. They were digging for control radius. Coming up, we'll get to the exact point they decided I wasn't compliant enough, and escalated into physical measures. There was a schedule. A literal escalation ladder, psychological nudging, environmental isolation, perimeter invasion, disruption conditioning, not a misunderstanding. Not a paranoid reading. A roadmap. Most people think control is loud. Real control is procedural, predictable, sanitized. What scared me wasn't that they were watching. What scared me was that my collapse was scheduled. That means the trench wasn't reactive. The trench was authorized. And just in case the viewer forgot who's telling this is still the man living inside a structure that was repurposed into a containment lab. The third log entry was marked Phase 3, compliance fracture. They weren't waiting for me to submit. They were waiting for me to break. And that's why there were no warnings. No letters. No complaints. They didn't need communication. They needed pressure. Coming up, we're getting to the moment where I catch them triggering the next phase in real time, not theory, execution. The file ended mid-sentence. But the footer had a timestamp, tomorrow. Not review date. Not evaluation window. A planned escalation, meaning the next phase was already scheduled to begin. And the very next morning, they didn't watch from afar. They crossed the boundary and made contact. The next morning didn't start, it arrived like a violation. No warning, no knock, just presence. Remember who is speaking to you. The homeowner they have been conditioning like an experiment subject. He was standing at the edge of the trench. Not a neighbor, not a contractor. Too confident, too still, too official. There was no clipboard, no tools, just a radio on his shoulder, transmitting a live channel I couldn't hear. Coming up, you're about to see how this wasn't a visit, it was a status check. He didn't introduce himself, didn't ask questions, didn't greet. He observed, like I was the exhibit. He kept looking not at me, but through me, watching for any crack or flinch like my reaction was data input. This wasn't HOA protocol, this was monitoring protocol. And because I am still the one telling you this, the resident they labeled unstable, you're hearing it from the exact man they expected to tremble. He scanned the perimeter, then my posture, then the doorway behind me, like he was checking containment integrity. Not friendly, not confrontational, clinical. He finally spoke 5 words, the kind people say when they're not requesting, they're verifying compliance. You've been staying inside, right? Not how are you? Not are you aware of the trench? Not we're working on repairs. Staying inside, like a ward, not a resident. Coming up, I'll tell you the moment I caught his radio transmitting when he thought I wasn't paying attention and whose voice answered. He didn't wait for a normal reply. He watched the tone of mine, not the content, because in conditioning, tone is the metric of obedience. And here's your reminder. You're listening to the man they believed was one trigger away from cracking open psychologically. He didn't check the trench. He checked me. The structure wasn't the perimeter. I was the perimeter. He didn't leave, he withdrew, like someone walking out of a test chamber once the observation interval is finished. He didn't turn off the radio, either. He lowered his voice into it. And that's when I heard the part that confirmed everything wasn't paranoia, it was protocol. Subject stable. Proceed to Phase 3 window. Not resident, not homeowner. Subject. Coming up next. The moment I trace the voice on the other end, and recognize exactly who sits behind that radio. He didn't look surprised I heard him. He looked satisfied. Data collected. Box checked. The trench wasn't a boundary. It was a cage test. And when I followed the frequency he was transmitting on, the voice waiting on the other end wasn't a contractor, it was the HOA president himself. I didn't chase the man with the radio, I chased the frequency. Silence lies. Signals don't. And remember who is speaking to you. The homeowner they mislabeled as unstable. The one they expected to break before he ever traced the chain of command. The transmission wasn't local chatter. It was routed through a closed channel, encrypted but sloppy, someone confident enough not to hide, because they believed I wasn't supposed to know how to listen. I filtered the static. One voice survived. Calm, steady, authoritative enough not to be questioned. Hold perimeter. Subject is reactive, not volatile. Subject. Reactive. Profile language. This wasn't fear management. This was risk indexing. Coming up, you'll hear the line where the president gives the next directive. The one that proves Phase 3 is a psychological attack, not a procedural step. The voice didn't sound like someone discussing a community member. It sounded like someone overseeing research. Distance without empathy. Interest without humanity. They weren't watching my property. They were evaluating my threshold. And here's your reminder. I am still that voice. The man inside the perimeter they engineered to collapse. Another line came through. If boundary pressure fails, escalate to destabilization incentive. Destabilization, not mediation, not resolution, destabilization, meaning, they weren't trying to stop conflict, they were trying to manufacture a breaking point. Coming up, I'll show you the exact tactic they used as the destabilization incentive. I traced the signal origin. Not a construction trailer, not a utilities truck, a roof-mounted repeater installed directly on HOA property. Not temporary, permanent, institutional. A community board does not install encrypted comms infrastructure. But containment programs do. And because I am still narrating this, the man targeted for fracture, you're hearing it from inside the organism they built. That's when I saw the escalation note tied to the frequency ID. If no compliance shift within 72 hours, advance to provocation stage. Provocation, engineered conflict, artificial stress spike. They weren't waiting for me to snap. They were planning to push until I did. Coming up, I'll show you which trigger they selected, and who they would send next. Then the last line came through the channel, 4 words that changed everything. He doesn't know yet. Not fear, not guilt, entitlement, like I was a variable. A test, not a person. And that was the instant it stopped being surveillance, it became warfare. Because the next voice that joined the radio call was a lawyer, not a board member, proving containment was already being prepared for litigation, not negotiation. The second voice didn't sound like a neighbor. No hesitation, no emotional tone, measured diction, professional cadence. And remember who is speaking. The homeowner they planned to break before he ever reached this stage, the man listening from inside their trap. This new voice wasn't assessing risk. It was preparing evidence strategy. Document non-compliance indicators pre-escalation, it said. Document, not observe, not de-escalate. Document. That means the trench wasn't the punishment. The trench was probable cause manufacturing. Coming up, I'll show you exactly which behavior they wanted to provoke so they could weaponize the claim. The lawyer spoke like he wasn't dealing with a resident, but a pending defendant. Language sterile. Language rehearsed. We need grounds before phase 4. Don't initiate contact until instability is demonstrable. Not if instability. Until. A foregone outcome. They weren't waiting for a slip. They were farming one. And here's your reminder. I'm still the voice inside this story. The one they stamped unstable before any incident even existed. The president replied casually, like they'd done this before. Pressure will get him there. Not maybe. Not if. When we break him. Coming up, I'll reveal the tactic they chose to spark the incident they could legally convert into control. The lawyer asked a final question. Is the subject isolated enough for reaction capture? Isolated enough. A calculation, like testing a cage seal before releasing electric current. This wasn't oversight. This was stage management. You don't isolate someone by accident. You don't dig a trench around a house and then say reactivity monitoring unless the plan is conversion, not compliance. They didn't want me quiet. They wanted me cornered, then recorded, then discredited. And yes, I'm still the homeowner narrating this, the one they believed would implode instead of decode. The last instruction sealed the intent. If he resists, we escalate to justification protocol. Justification, not mediation, not dialogue. Legal cover. Coming up, you'll hear the exact moment I realized what justification meant, and it didn't mean paperwork, it meant public narrative. The call ended, not with goodbye, with proceed. They had already decided the outcome. My reaction was supposed to write the script. But I didn't react, I listened. And that single deviation, awareness instead of outburst, is what broke their model. Because when they didn't get the unstable reaction they forecasted, they triggered the next phase manually, and it was no longer quiet. When they realized silence wasn't collapse, they switched strategy. They stopped observing, they entered. And remember who is speaking. The homeowner they tried to corner into breaking, the one still standing inside the boundaries they built to contain him. It didn't start with a knock. It started with footsteps on the property line, not the sidewalk, not the street, my soil. 3 of them this time. Not workers, not gardeners, not inspectors. Different posture, enforcement posture. Coming up, I'll show you the exact behavior they wanted me to exhibit on camera. The one false move they needed to label me threat. One stayed by the trench, another circled behind the side fence, and the third walked straight toward my front path like he already owned the route. No warrant, no notice, no pretext. They weren't checking property. They were checking response latency. Would I confront? Would I shout? Would I push back? Because confrontation wasn't conflict for them, it was legal ammunition. And here's your reminder. You're still hearing this from the man they tried to convert from a homeowner into a case file. The man in front wasn't carrying tools. He was carrying a body camera. Not HOA procedure, liability harvesting. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't state a reason. He just said the one line engineered to provoke a defensive outburst. We're allowed to be here. Allowed, not asked, not justified, declared. It was bait, silent trap disguised as confidence. Coming up, you'll hear how they escalated when I didn't give them what they needed. He stepped closer, past courtesy distance, past property courtesy, into psychological pressure radius. Not 1 inch accidental. They weren't here to fix anything. They were here to record a trigger. The second operative by the fence radioed something short, 1 word, no reaction. No reaction equals escalate. And yes, I am still narrating this, the subject they believed would break on schedule. The man at the door finally dropped the pretense. You're being evaluated. Not asked. Announced. This wasn't surveillance anymore. It was performance extraction. They wanted instability on tape. When I didn't give it, the third operative behind the house climbed further inward, past fence line, into private zone. Trespass wasn't a side effect. It was the next trigger. Coming up next, I'll show you what they damaged on my property to force a confrontation. The body cam agent shifted his stance, like preparing for the outburst they could cite in court. Like he could already see his paperwork written. But instead of shouting, I watched. Instead of lunging, I logged. And that is the one outcome they never planned for. Someone who witnesses instead of reacts. And when passive provocation failed, they changed tactics. They touched something they knew would force a response. By sabotaging it with their own hands. They couldn't get a reaction with presence, so they escalated to damage. The third operative, the one circling behind the property, didn't stay at the fence line. He entered, and the moment he crossed into my garden, he wasn't checking, he was tampering. And remember, you're still hearing this directly from the homeowner they wanted to classify as unstable. He didn't pick something random. He went straight for infrastructure. The irrigation line. One twist of a valve, one deliberate tear, silent sabotage with plausible deniability. Not loud, not messy, not obvious at first glance. Just enough damage to trigger an explosion later. A situation where I would be the one seen reacting, not them causing it. Coming up, I'll explain why irrigation damage is one of the most common wall escalation tactics, and why it's used instead of walls, wiring, or windows. The cameraman, the one in the front, watched my face the whole time. He wasn't here to see the act. He was here to see the reaction to the aftermath. Because in their playbook, the timeline is everything. 1. They sabotage. 2. They withdraw. 3. I discover damage hours later. 4. I confront. 5. They frame it as a violent confrontation with HOA staff. No sabotage report. No admission. No proof, unless I recorded them recording me. And here's your reminder again. I am still the one telling this story. The man they expected to crack, not document. The second operative radioed again, marked. Not observed, marked. It wasn't a patrol, it was a setup. They wanted me reactive, not aware, not strategic, triggered. Because once you react, you lose authorship of the story. They get to rewrite you. Coming up, I'll tell you what they planned to provoke next. A trespass confrontation that they initiated but I would be blamed for. When sabotage didn't cause a scene immediately, they stepped even deeper into provocation. The man with the camera moved closer to the doorway, closer than any neighbor or official would ever stand without consent. This wasn't proximity. This was possession theater. Like he was demonstrating for the record. Watch, this property isn't defended. It's unclaimed. It's open to enforcement. That is how HOAs steal control, not through law, but through precedent of compliance under pressure. And once again, you're hearing this from the one person they were trying to erase from his own home. The trespasser behind the property returned to the side yard, not fleeing, not hiding, waiting for the emotional explosion they assumed must be coming. But nothing came. Just observation, evidence, silence they couldn't manipulate. And when silence wasn't enough, they made contact. The moment the sabotage didn't trigger the expected reaction, they escalated from property interference to territory violation. The man with the radio walked up to the side wall of the house and placed his hand on it, slow, deliberate contact. Not a slip, not accidental, a claim gesture. And remember, this is still me, the homeowner, telling you exactly what happened, the person they were trying to push out of his own legal space by rewriting the roles. Me as a threat, them as officials. He didn't just touch the house, he leaned on it. That body language wasn't casual. It was stage. They were manufacturing the visual of authority over property, like this wasn't my home anymore. Like he was the one deciding what is or isn't permitted here. Coming up, I'll break down why HOAs use body contact with the house as a psychological weapon before they file paperwork. It's not bullying, it's pre-seizure conditioning. Meanwhile, the camera guy shifted angle, capturing the moment not from the sidewalk, but from the approach, like they were already constructing courtroom footage. See? We stand here freely. We belong here. That's how jurisdiction is theatrically claimed before it's legally attempted. And just in case you're wondering, yes, I'm reminding you again who is narrating this. The homeowner, the one they expected to detonate, not document. The second operative tapped the siding twice, the same way utility workers check something before replacing or repossessing it. Except there was no repair order. No notice. No emergency. It wasn't inspection. It was staging a right to enter. Because once they show they can touch the structure without being challenged, the next step in their escalation ladder is entering the structure under the claim of compliance response. And that's where they wanted me, cornered between two equally bad reactions. Confront them, right pointing arrow, I become the aggressor. Stay silent, right pointing arrow, they establish continued precedent of control. Coming up, I'll tell you what their next move was supposed to be. A forced conversation designed to frame me as hostile no matter what answer I gave. The HOA playbook relies on one psychological rule. If you force engagement, you frame the narrative. But I didn't engage. Not verbally. Not emotionally. Not on their timeline. So when the contact didn't break composure, they escalated again. The man with the camera stepped onto the boundary line, literally towed to property line, projecting the next level of entitlement. We are now inside the perimeter. They were about to speak, but not to explain, not to justify, to provoke, on record, a non-cooperative homeowner confrontation. And they didn't know I was already filming them first. Coming up, the moment they finally opened their mouths and accidentally incriminate themselves before the confrontation even starts. The man on the porch finally spoke. Not polite, not hesitant, commanding, the voice of someone who thinks touching the wall gives authority over lives. And remember who's speaking, me, the homeowner, still narrating while inside my own house under siege. Step aside, sir. This is an official inspection. Inspection? Official? They had no paper, no badge, just assumption and posture. And the cameras caught every syllable. Coming up, I'll reveal how their own words sealed their fate. I didn't move. I didn't answer. The operative tried again, louder. You will comply. This is within HOA rights. Rights? Rights without documentation. Rights without notice. Rights they invented in real time. And here's your reminder. I am still the man they underestimated, the one quietly recording everything. The radio man tapped again, signaling the other operative. Silent code. Not coordination for safety. Coordination for provocation. Coming up, I'll describe exactly how they planned to make me the aggressor, and why it failed. The camera operator circled slightly, adjusting angles like a director framing the scene. Each movement measured, each step intentional. I realized they believed presence and posture alone could create guilt. They didn't expect resistance. They didn't anticipate patience. Their Phase 4 escalation relied on emotional reaction. I finally stepped forward, carefully. Not aggressive, not loud, just enough to get a visual of the trespassers from my cameras. Every inch measured, every word calculated. Coming up, I'll show you the exact words they used next, their own voice betraying the premeditated harassment. The operative leaned closer, eyes fixed. Do you understand we are documenting non-compliance? Documentation, not guidance, not assistance. Documentation. I pointed my phone camera at them. Recording, live feed, every micro-expression, every hand movement. They had scripted the confrontation. They had rehearsed the posture. They had expected me to blow up. They did not expect the cameras to turn the table. The tension escalated. Each second felt like measured pressure. Each breath a countdown. Coming up, the wall realizes too late that the game has flipped, and that the very proof they were creating for prosecution is now evidence against them. I reminded myself. Patience is weapon. Observation is defense. Recording is leverage. Their plan to provoke was collapsing. The voice on the radio crackled, frustration barely hidden. Orders were murmured. The president's instructions? Ignored by distance, yet visible in metadata logs. They were caught by their own hubris. The operative's final line, before retreat, confirmed it. Hold position. Wait for legal review. They weren't leaving yet, not voluntarily, but they had stopped pushing for reaction. They were trapped in the process they had engineered. Coming up, the aftermath. Court action, legal leverage, and the shocking consequences Wa never expected. The house is quiet now. Too quiet. I walk through the yard. Camera in hand. Every inch recorded. Every step measured. The trench stares back at me. Empty. Still. A scar on the earth. And remember who is speaking. The homeowner. The one they tried to break. The one still standing in a property they wanted erased. I think about the day it all began. The digging. The radios. The cameras. The lawyer. The men with authority in their stance but not their papers. The commands. The sabotage. The trespass. Every step calculated. Every plan premeditated. I reflect on patience. Observation. Leverage. How silence became power. How stillness became defiance. How the smallest act, pointing a camera, became a weapon. I walk closer to the side wall. The handprint from before is gone. The siding is unmarked. Yet something feels different. Impossible to name. Impossible to ignore. Coming up, the moment arrives without warning. A shadow moves. Not human. Not expected. Too fast. Too quiet. And then a flash of light, blinding. And the sound. Metal, twisting, snapping. The ground shifts beneath me. I stumble. I fall. The camera slips. Recording. Still alive. Still capturing. I hear nothing else. Just a whisper in the wind. A shadow disappearing. And the house reacts. Walls tremble. The trench moves. Something in the earth slides. I try to call out. Voice gone. Words swallowed. And that's it. Everything stops. Suddenly. Irrevocably. No explanation. No resolution. Just the image on the camera, still rolling. Still blinking. Still watching. I sit in the dark. Breathing. Alone. Or maybe not. Something changed. Something broke. Something is watching me now. And the final thought comes. They tried to control me. But I didn't realize who, or what, was in control all along. The screen goes black. The recording keeps blinking. And the story ends.